And he concludes by saying that the Mayan Rite's emphasis on cultural diversity within the church is aligning with his call for a church with an Amazonian face. An Amazonian face. We're hearing that this Amazonian rite is going to be, in a sense, under a trial for a few years, and it will be observed. Welcome to the Father Leo Show, where I am dishing out faith, culture, and commentary. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the Synod of Synodality's approval of what is known as now the Mayan Rite. And we're going to have to figure out, is the Catholic Church under Pope Francis trying to undermine the Catholic faith, or are these efforts to try to support and strengthen the Catholic faith for the Mayan people? But before we jump into it, please make sure you like, subscribe, share, and comment. Trust me, your interaction, you sharing it, you making comments only helps to overcome the internet's suppression of Catholic content. And again, the only way we can do this is if we actually have a staff, and the staff needs to get paid. And so please support us on patreon.com/thefatherleoshow. And your support not only gives you access to really great content, but also some special perks. So let's just jump right into it now with this understanding of the different rites of the Catholic Church and what does this new Mayan Rite do for you and me. First and foremost, I want to just play a little video that explains the different rites that the Catholic Church has. And the Catholic Church, being Catholic, meaning we are universal, truly fullness of the Spirit, if you were to look at it from a Greek interpretation, from a Latin interpretation, a Western interpretation, it would be considered universal, which basically means we are everywhere and we are filled by being everywhere. So make sure that you have that understanding, because when we say we are Roman Catholic, that means that our teachings come from the Holy Roman Catholic Church. But there are other churches around the world that pray very differently than we do in, St. Mary's Parish in Centerville, USA. But they are still Roman Catholic, even if they celebrate Mass with a different rite. So here's a video that kind of gives you a general explanation of different rites in the Catholic Church.
Did you know that the Catholic Church has more than just one tradition? There are 6 beautiful rites, each with its own unique heritage. First, the Latin rites, the largest and most familiar, celebrated worldwide, also known as the Western Rite. Then there are the Eastern rites, not to be confused with Eastern Orthodoxy. These are Eastern rites who are still in communion with Rome, starting with the Byzantine Rite, rooted in Greek tradition. Next, the Alexandrian Rite, with its origins in Egypt and Ethiopia, and the Antiochian Rite, which hails from ancient Syria. We also have the Armenian Rite, uniquely Armenian, and the Chaldean Rite, tracing back to ancient Mesopotamia. 6 rites, one faith, each a testament to the Catholic Church's rich diversity and unity.
Okay, so that's a pretty good explanation, but even within the Latin rites, you have something called the Ambrosian Rite, which was celebrated in Milan and under the under the auspice of Charles Borromeo, I believe. Yeah, the Cardinal Charles Borromeo, who was the Archbishop Cardinal of Milan at one point. So this understanding of different rites means that people can express their Catholic faith, their faith in Jesus Christ, still be rooted in a historical church, but they receive, in a sense, their authority from the Holy Roman Catholic Church. And so when we talk about the Roman Catholic Church, remember that it is a designation not just of space, but also of time. Time. What do I mean by that? Well, remember that Peter was sent to Rome, or he went to Rome. And there he was supposed to convert, in a sense, the emperor, and he didn't. He was crucified upside down. And this is interesting because, Paul was sent to the Gentiles, and he eventually goes back to Rome. and he's killed in Rome. So why is this important? Because the princes of the apostles, Peter and Paul, were killed in Rome at a very specific place and time, because the phrase all roads lead to Rome indicate that at one point in the known Western world, Rome was the center of it all. And in fact, we can even argue that Rome's, empire has reached far and wide around the world. Around the world. You don't see a lot of, for example, Asian influences in Rome, but you do see Roman influences in Asia. You don't see a lot of African influences in Europe, but you see Rome, European countries, influence in Africa. And why? Because we have to remember that if Rome was the center of the world, whether it be through commerce or whether it be through, through art and culture, and also by military might, these are important designations. And so to say that we are Roman Catholic means that we are founded by Jesus Christ, obviously, and the foundations of the apostles are there to help us designate that we're not making up our faith as we go along. So having said that, let's jump into now an understanding of why this Mayan rite is so, in a sense, controversial, but it really shouldn't be. So this is coming from Catholic Online. The Vatican recently granted approval for the Mayan rite of the Mass and the liturgical adaptation designed for the indigenous communities of the dioceses of San Cristobal de las Cruces in Mexico. Cardinal Felipe Arizmendi Esquivel, the Bishop Emeritus of the diocese and a key advocate of the rite, announced the approval in his weekly column on November 13th, 2024. So what are some of these changes? Well, he wants to emphasize that these are liturgical changes, not a departure from Catholic doctrine, but rather a cultural expression of the Roman rite. Key, cultural expression of the Roman rite. They are the liturgy of the church and not just customs and habits that are viewed with suspicion. So, for example, they will have ritual dances. These are performed during the offertory, the prayer of the faithful, or after communion. Described as simple movements accompanied by traditional music, the dances aim to express devotion in a culturally resonant way. All right, so liturgical dancing. Personally, not a fan. In the United States, I am not a fan. But I have seen liturgical dancing in, say, for example, the continent of Africa, where people are traveling hours by foot to go to Mass. And their liturgies there take hours. And why? Because they are expressing themselves through a ton of singing and a ton of dancing. The preaching is extensive. Honestly, the Americans would just go nuts and they would walk out and not put a penny in the collection basket. Simply because culturally, this is what they do. But I have to say, this is where I kind of draw the line, because while they might do cultural dancing in different countries as part of their kind of celebration, the way that they express themselves, what cultural dances do we have in America? I mean, honestly, the swing, or, I don't even know what they're called now. Twerking? Yeah, I said it. This would be disgusting. So we in America do not have a cultural tradition of dance within the context of prayer. We just don't. And so this is why I say a big liturgical no to stuff like this. So that was in Portugal. Excuse me, that is probably in, South America, a Portuguese-speaking country, maybe Brazil. So do they have, that kind of dancing there. Well, to me, this just kind of looks more of like a performance rather than true participation of the congregation. Because again, if you go to Africa, the continent of Africa, the way they process, everyone is doing it. Not just a bunch of, young women who look that way. They all kind of look like they could have been in a dance group together or something, like a girl band. So this seems more of like a performance. For me, this is a big liturgical no, because I don't think this has anything to do with them worshiping, but rather them performing. So we've got to be very attentive and almost even careful with what it means to do liturgical dancing. But wait, there's more than just ritual dances. They also have the incense ministry. In a significant departure from traditional practice, women will perform the role of incense bearers. After the priest blesses the incense, women are culturally specific incense burners to incense the altar, sacred images, and the congregation. This might be a spillover to the Vestal virgins having to make sacrifices to gods. And this is where I kind of have to ask myself, what is a woman? In today's kind of woke world, I don't think that this is an expression of wokeness, but I do find it interesting that they want specifically for women to do it. And it would be kind of, again, more dancing with them bringing the incense around. And I've seen this in even some Asian countries as well. And I guess we would just have to ask ourselves, what does the incense mean? Is it going to be a distraction, or is it going to actually represent the two things that incense is supposed to represent? Our prayers rising up to heaven and the cloud of witnesses, the saints, who are helping us to pray rather than just distracting us because of this thing that they have to do. And again, it seems that it just has to specifically be women. Now, there's another part to this the Mayan Rite, and it's lay leadership. So according to Cardinal Arizmendi, he says, a layperson of moral standing may lead communal prayers at various points, such as the beginning of the Mass or during the prayers of the faithful. The Cardinal clarified that these roles do not replace the priest's position as the celebrant, but rather enhance communal participation. And again, we have that even here in the United States, where you have lectors, where you have people doing some of the announcements, for example, offering the prayers of the faithful if a deacon is not present, even assisting as an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, not an ordinary minister, but an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion. And that person, and by the way, if you're in the United States and you're listening to this, I would recommend that you make sure that you have an annual commissioning of extraordinary ministers of communion, so that they don't think that they are entitled to giving out communion wherever they go and all the time. I think that it should be something that requires their full active participation, for them to go through ongoing formation and to be deputed as an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion annually, by them kind of offering a little prayer. You can create a little prayer service to offer a blessing for them, and obviously be grateful for that. In mega churches where I've been, if I would be the only one to give communion, we would be there for about a half an hour. So I'm oftentimes grateful for extraordinary ministers of communion who know their role. They don't assume that this is something that they are entitled to do for the rest of their life, but really at the request and the blessing and the commissioning of the Catholic Church. Now, the reason why I think this is an important part is because in this part of the world where the Mayan Rite may be celebrated, let's admit there are very few priests there. And as such, Catholics who are not as educated are being poached by Protestant churches. In fact, there will be Protestant ministers who will, say, oh, there's no priest there, so therefore you can't really celebrate your Roman Catholic faith because you don't have a priest there. And so there's really no one standing up to that. And why is this important to me? Well, because the two canonized saints of the Philippines is Pedro Calunsud and, I'm a bad Filipino, San Lorenzo Ruiz. These are two laymen. They are catechists. They actually were teaching the faith to the Catholic indigenous people in a time when priests were not accessible, or they were imprisoned or being killed. So I appreciate this part, but the lay leadership, again, Cardinal Arizmendi says, is not to replace the clergy, but to help and support and enhance it, which requires that the lay people should be properly formed, that they should be recognized as kind of people officially there to represent the Catholic faith when a priest or a deacon is not present. This doesn't mean that that a lay person is holier than a priest, but I can tell you, I've met a lot of holy lay people who are way holier than I am. And so I think this is a positive thing. But do you actually need a rite to do this? Or can we just simply recognize? I mean, so my questions are really, why does the incense ministry have to be women? Why do the ritual dances have to actually be dances? And can it just be more of like a procession? Because if it's a dance, what comes to the mind of many people in America, or at least in the Western world, is performance. And then as far as the lay leadership is concerned, we kind of already have that. So why do you need a new rite for it? But here's where Arizmendi continues, because there are some criticisms that were raised. For example, there's references in, say, some of the prayers that would reference the 4 cardinal directions. And we wonder if it is consistent with Catholic theology, because it really conflicts with the church's monotheistic framework. And so, for example, in one of the rites prayers, there's a draft that talks about caressing the face of Mother Earth and invoking God through the 4 cardinal points, with some of the interpretation being rooted in Mayan polytheism, which means multiple ways, multiple gods, that is. And so these were actually omitted from the Vatican-approved versions, but the concerns remain. So thankfully, these were dealt with. But the cardinal says that these were expressions of an incarnation of faith. He says, if there are deviations in some indigenous customs, we can help them to reach their fullness in Christ and in his church. And he concludes by saying that the Mayan Rite's emphasis on cultural diversity within the church is aligning with his call for a church with an Amazonian face. An Amazonian face. So we're hearing that this Amazonian rite is going to be, in a sense, under a trial for a few years, and it will be observed. So I'm grateful that it's not like we're just throwing ourselves completely into it. I also have to caution that there are some Catholic commentators, and some of them might be well-intentioned, but they might not be fully informed of all of the details, and it's creating not only a lot of confusion, but unnecessary division. So even, for example, the Pachamama debacle, I would say that that was more of anything really bad communication as to what was going on with that statue. No one was worshiping that statue. There were a lot of really bad details that were overlooked in that debacle. But it really created a lot of consternation and anxiety and even hatred to Pope Francis, which, you know, again, you can love him, you can hate him, but he's still the Pope. And I do not think that he is trying to undermine the Catholic Church, but really trying to evangelize it in a world, again, it's still part of our Catholic world, where they have a deep deep-rooted tradition, and they want to, in a sense, accept those traditions and baptize them in the Catholic faith. The same way, this is a very Pauline form of evangelization, taking the things that were once pagan and baptizing it and looking at it through the lens of Jesus Christ. Now, could some of these things be abused? Yes, for sure. We've got to be very attentive to it. So I think what we have to do is really pray. But I think ultimately, in my mind, Africa is booming with Catholicism. I mean, there's more Catholics in Africa than in the continent of Africa than perhaps all of the Catholics almost worldwide put together. I mean, it's like 8.8 billion Catholics or something like that. It's a shocking number of Catholics in the continent of Africa. But what I'm finding it's interesting is that while they have various traditions and ritual expressions, again, like their songs, like their liturgical dancing, like their vesture, there's a video. If I can find it, I'll show it. If I can't find it, then sorry. But it's an altar server in Africa, and he's doing incense, and he's got the thurible the way we would do the thurible. But this guy's like doing it like a yo-yo, sending it back and forth. I mean, it's almost like liturgical nunchucks and just swinging it around. And it's really impressive. Now, clearly, we don't do that, with little Billy with the thurible for the Christmas liturgy and trying to not vomit, because the incense makes kids sick in America. But in Africa, they are loving their incense. And it's almost interesting because they love all things Latin, ritual, Roman Rite. And so it just makes me think that Cardinal Arizmendi, I'm grateful, but he is the Bishop Emeritus. I think he may have been part of a generation that was a little more loose liturgically. I'm not judging him. I just know that there was a generation of priests and bishops and cardinals that were a little bit more loose liturgically because it was just a sign of their times. They wanted to be kind of with it in a way. But I just don't think that Mass is a place to try to be with it. I think it's a place where we're supposed to just put all of our personalities, in a sense, aside and worship God as a Roman Catholic Church. In different rites, of course, as we already see, there are many expressions, but they are in union with the Holy Father. And so again, this is only a trial period, so relax. But I take a look at Africa, and we have to just ask ourselves the question. The African Catholic Church are very Latin influenced. Very, very Latin. They do very little other than their lengthy singing and processional dancing. But everything they do is very Latin. And they're exploding with Catholics. And then we sometimes have, even in America, where if a parish is taking their liturgy seriously, they have beautiful liturgies. The music is gorgeous. The altar servers are trained and they're wearing black shoes. I'm going to have to do an episode about that. But they're really taking the liturgy seriously. Those churches are booming. The churches that are trying to be cool and hip and with it, they're dying. They really are dying. And I know this because I've traveled the country and I've traveled the world. And I've seen where when churches and their pastors just take liturgy seriously, their parishes and their flocks grow. I guess what's disappointing is that while there has been a permission for the Mayan Rite, there is, in a sense, by Pope Francis's, pontificate, a tampering down on the Latin Rite, also known as the Tridentine Rite. And what's interesting is that, again, where the traditional Latin Masses are being celebrated, they are getting a lot of young families. And they are raising their families well in the Catholic faith, because that's the way they want to express their faith, with Latin, with more seriousness, with more symbol, whether it be the veils or the liturgical gestures. So it just makes me wonder, is this Mayan rite really more of a personal preference, or is it really motivated by the Holy Spirit trying to evangelize the Mayan indigenous people? So this is something to think about. But I think maybe for us as a takeaway, number one, please relax. Don't listen to a lot of the pundits. Make sure that you do the research yourself. Secondly, if it doesn't affect you because you don't live in a Mayan ritual city, then honestly, I wouldn't worry about it. I would work on your relationship with Jesus Christ and your knowledge of Catholic doctrine. Work on that. Don't pay attention to much else. Thirdly, pray for the Catholic Church around the world, not just in your parish where you're arguing about, the silliest things. Should we have coffee and donuts every Sunday? I mean, this is honestly some of the things that Catholic churches make such a big deal about aren't really all that important. I'm not saying that the work that look, I've been a parish priest as well for many years, and so I know that they do some important things, but the important things are the sacraments and the education of the people. Some of the other things, whether it be church politics or different personalities and drama, not my cup of tea, which is why I'm saying pray for the churches around the world that are Catholic. It'll help you to realize that you are part of a great family, and the way they do things in China or in Africa or in Mayan Mexico aren't going to be the same way they do things in Centerville City, USA. But can we still be a family? And can we all seek holiness? That is what I want you to take away with. Don't worry too much about these things. Be aware of it, but make sure you do your research and don't be so influenced by what you're seeing out there, because as well-intentioned as some people might be, they might not be as experienced, cultured, or educated in the actual experiences of what it means to be a part of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. And remember that between now and the second coming, our Catholic Church is still a pilgrim ship. We're going to be swished to the left. We're going to be swished to the right. We're going to sometimes even take in water. But as I've said many times before, G.K. Chesterton reminds us that grace can turn that sinking ship into a submarine that hopefully is headed in heaven's direction. I hope that this gives you something to think about, something to pray about, and hopefully something that calms your heart whenever we're hearing news about the synodality, synod, and the Mayan Rite. Well, this should hopefully give you much to, again, think about and pray about. And please make sure you like, subscribe, share, and comment. And please consider supporting us at patreon.com/thefatherleo show so that we can continue to dish out faith, culture, and commentary. God bless you, and stay hungry for God.